So when we have two camera angles and you have to decide when to switch back and forth, let me show you some good examples and some bad examples.
To get out of that situation.
Yeah, for sure. It's definitely something.
So right as he started talking, that's when it should be cut over to him.
Something you want to consider if the environment changes. I want to be able to look.
In the middle of his sentence, it was cut back very shortly after he started talking. Now, there are some theories that if somebody's talking too long, you can switch camera angles to make it more interesting visually, but that's not what's going on here. I don't think he's talking long enough for it to justify switching back already.
Lower that person as quickly as possible in those conditions. And then there's other benefits.
So it switched back to him, and these are all like mid-sentence. It's not like one complete thought, and then he has a new thought, and then you can switch to another camera angle.
It's of being able to lower the rope. Like if I have an abrasion point, I can lower for that. I can't do that with this system. Or setting rope length. You and I did that in the canyon.
Is it?
You and I did that in a canyon. Technically, should have been the last part that it was focused on him, and then as soon as I start talking, it would cut back to me. So let's look at that again.
Or setting rope length. You and I did that in the canyon.
It's interesting. We made a whole video about making sure you tie a knot at the end of your rope, and Brent's like, yeah, that'll kill you.
On the
Okay, so this is another section that I wanted to bring up. And yes, I own more than one shirt now that I see that I'm wearing the same one.
spine of the carabiner blocks against the system.
What don't you like about this?
So it cut back to me when I was
Blocks
talking.
against the system.
What don't you like about this?
So this in particular, if you
So that's fine, jumping back and forth fairly quickly because I talked. Could leave it on the camera with both of us in it, but a benefit to having the two cameras.
the carabiner blocks against the system.
What don't
See all that dead space? So let's get rid of that.
Against the system.
So we'll cut that out, and we'll cut that out, and now let's look at it.
Blocks against the system.
what don't you like about this?
So
a little bit faster
this,
paced.
in particular, if you load it quite a bit and it cinches down, it can be somewhat difficult to get this off. And that only becomes a little bit time consuming. And that only becomes a little bit.
Not necessarily a big problem to cut to the other camera while he's what we'll call mid thought, but let's tighten that up.
Somewhat difficult to get this off.
Okay.
Off.
If we get rid of this,
And that only becomes a little bit.
so if we got rid of this,
Be somewhat difficult to get this off. That only becomes a little bit time
way tighter.
consuming.
Especially if this is a course, I'm not worried about tightening it up a lot. But if you're going to switch camera angles anyways, you already got the splice, right?
After you've retrieved your rope at the bottom, if your hands are cold, whatever the conditions are, I don't want to be fiddling with this more than I have to. And I definitely don't want to have the need to cut this off, especially since this is quite a bit length of rope that I don't have to cut. So it does work. Other things you got to be careful of.
I would say that camera angle should have gone over to him when he said,
Quite a bit length of rope that I don't have to cut. So
here's where I would have transitioned.
it does work. Other things you got to be
Other things you got to be,
careful of is that some
like that's a whole new thought. Other things you got to be careful of, that's when I would switch a camera angle.
very stiff, thick ropes don't set well. They're hard to tie, and there's some space on there. And then this can open up and start doing some weird stuff that you got to be careful of. So anytime you do a clove hitch, that you got to be careful of. So anytime you do a clove hitch,
I think that's a nice transition. It's been on him long enough. He's re-emphasizing the point. I think that was super smooth enough.
set better in a supple rope, but you want to make sure that is set nice.
So it either gets too tight or not tight at all.
Right.
Okay.
So you got to pay attention to it.
But this is fairly common. What is your favorite now?
I've been playing around with this one that is.
So because we're bantering back and forth, it is nice to leave it on the camera angle that's on
It's
both of
too
us.
tight or not tight at all.
Right.
Okay.
Even though he's talking. Not every time Brent talks should it cut over to the Brent camera.
You got to pay attention to it.
But this is fairly common. What is your favorite knot?
I've been playing around with this one that is similar to a stone knot you
So that's a good cut. He's about to go into something. It's all Brent. That's a great cut.
do with the fiddle stick.
We'll cover how to tie it in the video where we go into the depth of how you do each knot. But this goes through the ring still.
Yep.
Why?
So if I didn't put this through the ring and I threw down 100 feet of
Another good cut, right when I asked him a question.
rope,
I would have to pull that 100 feet back up to put through the ring because this is where I'm going to need to retrieve it. I need the last person who's something to repel
If you don't know the trick, push L on your keyboard to double speed this.
from. Everybody else is repelling off this carabiner. So this is why I refer to this as a direct system. It's directly on the repel strand, which means I need to change it in order to make it retrievable.
It's not retrievable when you're coming down, but it is in the ring already.
Correct. So it's a little bit lower on the ease of rigging.
I talked. You had to cut to the camera with both of us. Could probably leave it there a little bit longer. You don't have to. This was done super good enough.
Because I have to change it. So it's not as easy. But as you saw, it is pretty easy to rig once I know how to tie this knot.
So it doesn't win a lot of awards and ease of rigging.
Nope.
But it's also not, I'd say almost not as efficient because you still obviously can't get more than one person down at a time, and then you got to change it for you to even go down.
Correct.
But I bet rescues and abrasion are better at this.
Yeah, absolutely. So if somebody's on the rope and it's weighted, I can start to untie the motor, and now I can start lowering this person.
I like the fact that it's staying on this camera because him and I are having this conversation at this point.
from the anchor. So if they have a problem, at least I can get them to the ground.
Like not having enough rope.
Correct.
You can give me another couple feet.
Great example. I like to show the good and bad examples whenever I make these videos of edits that were provided to me and how I would have tweaked it. Now, a double camera thing is pretty hard for me to adjust. Like you saw, I could cut out draggy points, but I cannot undo different camera angles because I don't have the original Premiere file. I'm just working with the rendered MP4 in this case. So, I don't think any of it was the end of the world. Definitely for the content, it's not worth trying to change it. But it's important to understand how, here at How Not To, I like to break it into complete thoughts whenever we switch camera angles, instead of mid-thought switching the angles.